H.R. 1695, Strengthening Agency Management and Oversight of Software Assets, SOMOSA Act, a bill to improve the visibility, accountability, and oversight of agency software asset management practices and for other purposes.
Without objection, the bill shall be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. The chair recognizes himself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute. The clerk will please report the amendment.
An amendment in the nature of a substitute offered to H.R. 1695 as offered by Mr. Comer of Kentucky.
Okay. All right. Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the substitute will be considered as original text for the purposes of further amendment. I recognize myself for 5 minutes for a statement on the bill and the amendment. Federal agencies spend billions of dollars a year on software licenses without a full understanding of what they are purchasing and how it compares to what they are already paying for. The result is wasteful spending on duplicative or unnecessary software licenses. As amended by my bipartisan and bicameral amendment in the nature of a substitute, this legislation will provide Congress better insight into how our federal agencies purchase and use software. The text we are considering today improves the introduced text of H.R. 1695 to improve government software purchasing without unduly limiting the procurement options of federal agencies. These changes reflect multiple rounds of feedback from industry groups and the Office of Management and Budget, as well as conversations between the bill sponsor and House and Senate committee staff. As amended, 1695 requires an agency to better manage its software and develop a plan for addressing any costly, unnecessary licenses. This will reduce wasteful spending and improve government efficiency. I thank Mr. Cartwright, Ranking Member Raskins, and my colleagues in the Senate for working with the committee staff to ensure that this legislation appropriately achieves its goals. I also thank Mr. Fallon and Ms. Mace for their early support of this bill. I urge my colleagues to support this bipartisan legislation. I now yield the ranking member to the ranking member for his statement.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for including on today's agenda this bipartisan good government bill that will achieve important cost savings for the public. I want to support H.R. 1695, the SOMOSA Act, which was introduced by our colleague, Mr. Cartwright of Pennsylvania. The government will need to spend tens of billions of dollars this year on software purchases and on maintenance. This makes up a big chunk of the estimated $100 billion that we will spend on information technology overall. Previous efforts to increase oversight and transparency of federal expenditures on software, including the Megabyte Act of 2016, have saved federal agencies an estimated $450 million over just a 3-year period, but serious challenges remain. For example, a recent audit by GAO found that software license data reported by federal agencies was inconsistent due to wide variation in exactly how agencies track and maintain their inventories. Current software contract and asset management practices also fall short of achieving enough transparency to allow agencies to purchase software products and services that actually meet their specific needs and priorities. H.R. 1695 would require federal agency CIOs to complete comprehensive assessments of the software paid for by, in use at, or deployed throughout the government. These assessments would update and expand the software inventories required by the Megabyte Act. The bill would require agencies to submit comprehensive assessments to GSA, OMB, GAO, and Congress to facilitate stronger oversight of software contracts and federal spending. It would also require agencies to use these assessments to develop a plan to better manage agency software procurement and management, which would be required to include remediation of deficiencies, automation of management processes, and workforce training. One industry analysis estimates the cost savings of this act at $500 to $750 million a year. The Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs estimates that the bill could save taxpayers up to $5 billion annually. I appreciate Chairman Gary Peters' leadership in developing and driving this legislation and his Republican co-lead, Senator Cassidy of Louisiana. I also want to thank Representative Matt Cartwright for championing the bill over here in the House, along with our subcommittee chairs, Mr. Fallon and Ms. Mace. This is a good bipartisan bill that will allow the government to operate more transparently, efficiently, and cost-effectively, and I'm very happy to support its passage today, and I yield back to you.
Would the ranking member?
Yes, by all means.
I thank the ranking member. I just want to underscore, going back to FTARA and the scorecard this committee created and the 15 hearings we've had on its implementation, that software licensing management was one of the categories on the scorecard, and I think we were able to make progress. We need to continue to monitor that, but I think it just underscores the fact that vigorous oversight of FTARA and the use of that scorecard has in fact made a difference. I thank my friend for yielding.
Well, thank you. Now, just to echo your point, since its inception in December of 2014, FTARA has empowered the CIOs in federal agencies. It's improved how the government acquires and manages IT, and it's saved nearly $30 billion of taxpayer money. So this is a tool that Congress, CIOs, agency heads, and outside stakeholders use to understand how the agencies manage and secure their IT assets. And the scorecard also helps Congress hold federal agencies accountable for implementing fundamental and evolving best IT practices.
If my friend would yield one more time.
Yes, by all means.
I thank him so much for pointing that out. GAO has pointed out that we've almost saved $30 billion. I cannot think of another federal piece of legislation that can claim to have saved, according to GAO, $30 billion since it was passed into law 7 or 8 years ago. So I think our keeping our foot to the pedal with respect to implementation of that law continues to have a return on it. I thank my friend for pointing it out.
Yeah, and I'll just close by saluting you, Mr. Connolly, for your leadership on FTARA and for making sure that we've had these biannual reviews, these hearings that have been so important in the FTARA context, and I'm happy to yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes Ms. Mace for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Ranking Member Raskin as well. As a lead co-sponsor of this bipartisan measure, I also want to thank my colleague across the aisle, Representative Cartwright, for his leadership on the issue of government waste and software licenses. And I also want to thank committee staff for their wise revisions. Sometimes small parts make a huge difference in the federal government. And imagine that today, as the media talks about how divisive we are up here on the Hill, and oftentimes we are, but in this room, one of the most divisive committees on the Hill, we are actually working together, working across the aisle to make government work better, run better, be more efficient, and save taxpayer dollars. So I want to thank the leadership today on that. Despite over $100 billion in spending on federal software licenses, most agencies have no comprehensive record of what they're actually buying and what they have already paid for. It's shocking and blows my mind that most federal agencies don't carry a record of what licenses they've purchased or what licenses they have, how many they have, the duplicity that is happening because they don't have a comprehensive record is a place where we can be more efficient, which is the entire purpose of this legislation. Our bureaucracy is likely wasting substantial sums of unused, duplicative, and unnecessary software licenses, wasting millions, maybe billions of taxpayer dollars. No American household would have 3 Netflix subscriptions or 2 cable bills, so why should a federal agency, right? We should work smarter, not harder here. The negotiated version before the committee reflects extensive dialogues with agencies on how to best implement the goals of this legislation and slash wasteful spending. By requiring agencies to develop a plan to consolidate licenses, we give them the tools to identify and eliminate waste and improve efficiency within their operations. So agencies spending money on software licenses without a comprehensive understanding of what they're buying and what they already have is a massive waste of taxpayer dollars. Agencies typically don't know how many employees are using which software or where, or how many seats they have in those licenses, or what restrictions are associated with those licenses. Agencies sometimes unwittingly waste money on duplicative, unused, restrictive, and unnecessary licenses. So this is inefficient, wasteful, and impedes important IT modernization work for the government that we need to focus on. HR 1695 will save money by cutting down these duplicative licenses and underused software licenses as well. It'll require agencies to update and expand their software inventory so that they have a detailed insight into their software licenses, costs, usage rates, seats, et cetera. The amended bill addresses bloated, underutilized, and costly federal agency software licenses by requiring agencies to develop a plan to consolidate them or to update them. This legislation removes unduly prescriptive provisions present in the version introduced last year and again earlier this year. Those provisions had presupposed the merits of certain software licensing solutions. Again, I want to thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania and his staff for working to improve this particular legislation. I also want to thank Senate staff and committee staff. I want to thank my colleagues across the aisle as well for working together. I have found, Mr. Chairman, that the Oversight Committee, although we have some of the most progressive and most far-right members and some in the middle, that cybersecurity has been a place where we've been able to work together, and I would encourage us to show leadership on the federal level, on the national level, of how we all can join hands and do something for the good of every single taxpayer in this country. And I want to thank my colleagues for their leadership on this. And I would also, Mr. Chairman, like to ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record the following documents. I have a coalition letter to this committee in support of the Samosa Act from the Coalition for Fair Software Licensing, the Computer and Communications Industry Association, the Alliance for Digital Innovation, and NetChoice.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Lady yields back. Do any other members wish to be heard? The question is now on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The question is now on favorably reporting H.R. 1695 as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, Chair recognizes Mr. Palmer. Recorded vote is ordered. As previously announced, further proceedings on the question will be postponed. So we're going to go to 12.